from the outside now, it's so obvious. Yet it took me years and years and years to realize it and accept it. I guess because of the way that alcohol is seen in this country, it's glamorized, it's promoted, it's encouraged. It's kind of strange if you don't drink.
Before this episode starts, I have a small favor I need to ask you. Since the channel started, over 90% of those that have watched have not subscribed. So if you liked any of my podcast episodes or any of the content on this channel, please hit the subscribe button down below. It helps the channel grow. The bigger the channel, the bigger the guests. Thank you and enjoy this episode. Will Armstrong, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, man. I'm excited.
My first question is, how did your sobriety story start?
Oh, how long have you got? Well, to be honest, my relationship or transition through drinking alcohol is probably not that much different from most people in this country. I started drinking when I was a young teenager. You kind of discover beer and you discover house parties and having fun. And I lived out in the countryside. I was a bit more rural, so it was more house parties than going on a night out in town. And it was as soon as you find alcohol, it was something which really just for the first time in your life, you feel yourself in a different way. It was exciting, it was new, and it always used to give me like a buzz. It was also funny. You'd go into school and you talk about, who was the drunkest and all those kind of things. And then it was probably around the age of 15. I ended up developing what I didn't realize at the time was actually quite severe social anxiety. I didn't really know what it was. I just felt kind of anxious to be around people. I felt it was difficult to be myself. I was always on edge thinking maybe I'd look stupid, maybe people would laugh at me. And it was, as a teenager, you have so many different worries or concerns, and anxiety is just a part of that. But then when I went to university, and I went to a very good sporting university, actually, and I studied sports technology. And I remember thinking that because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And, I came from a family where, my dad, my mum, my brother all work in the medical world. And I thought I liked sports and I wanted to be healthy. And I went there to study sports technology. But as soon as I got there, I realized I didn't really want to do that. So a lot of the time, I didn't attend any lectures. I didn't attend any seminars because I didn't feel comfortable around people. I still had this anxiety, and the only way I could get rid of that anxiety or overcome it was by going out and drinking. So alcohol, therefore, became a tool. It was a tool for me to escape my anxieties or to mask them so I could be more of myself. And this kind of carried on through a couple of years of university before I got to the point where I thought, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I'm having panic attacks so much. And what I didn't realize at the time was that alcohol was actually making it a whole lot worse. I ended up leaving, trying to find a job or trying to think about what I wanted to do. I was 19, 20 years old. And I thought there was a new restaurant just down the road from where I grew up. And it was kind of like a gastro pub, kind of fancy for the area. And I thought, let me go and get a job just as a way to just to make some money, just until I figure out what it is I want to do with my life. And, it's a strange thing for someone who has social anxiety to feel comfortable in a room full of people. And it was because of the psychological control, I guess, I had in that situation. Even just the fact that I was stood up and people were sat down, I felt like I could control the situation. And basically that was what the anxiety was. It was the fear of not having control. And even at my age now, there's always that side of me that loves to be in control. And I guess that is another motive for not drinking, because I want to be in control of my situation, my environment. So I found it incredibly freeing to suddenly find myself working in that industry. However, that industry comes with serving, promoting, drinking alcohol. And every night, you'd have a big service. We'd all sit around. We've got our own bar, and we'd pour drinks and just sit around and talk. And, sometimes you'd have maybe like 8, 9 pints after work. And you do that 6, 7 nights a week because we were working so much. And that just becomes normal. Waking up, not feeling fresh seems normal. Getting really drunk just seemed normal. And again, it all seems very innocent because of the way that alcohol is seen in this country. It's glamorized, it's promoted, it's encouraged. It's kind of strange if you don't drink. And, those of us who have drank heavily and then stopped, we seem like the odd ones, to the mass population, I guess. But when I was working in this restaurant, I remember thinking, do you know what? I love this. This is what I want to do. I want to get out there. I'm motivated. I'm driven. I have aspirations. I want to really do this. And I remember thinking, if I'm going to take this seriously, there's one place I really want to go to see what the standard is like, and that was London. And at 21 years old, I packed my bags, went down to London, and I remember thinking I got a job at quite a famous restaurant in London. Thinking, wow, these guys are going to be professional. I need to really think about not drinking after work. And I was smoking quite a lot. I was like, let me not smoke, so they I don't want them to see me as a smoker. And then the first night I got there, some of my new colleagues said, let's go out for dinner. And as we went out for dinner, they were back and forth to the toilet every 3 4 minutes. No one ate their food. I was so naive. I didn't really know what was going on. I had no idea of this shiny drug called cocaine that everyone was taking. And it wasn't long, only a few months, until I ended up falling into that world, which was much bigger than I ever thought it would have been. Growing up, alcohol was fine, drugs were not. It's only now that I look back and I think, if you were given the choice of every drug without ever having taken it, and you see the effects, surely alcohol would be the one that you go, well, that makes no sense. The amount of bad decisions you make, the amount of injuries, the amount of, it's a depressant. It's all like so many negatives. If you looked at it on paper, you'd be like, yeah, that's definitely not for me. However, I ended up getting caught up in this world in London of working in some very good places in hospitality, and drink and drugs just came with it. And it was so normalized. It was so normalized. Passing around a packet of cocaine was as normal as handing someone a cigarette. And that wasn't just in the industry, that was in London in general. And I would burn myself out regularly. I would be working long hours, long days, long weeks. And I would exacerbate that by going out all night long as well. And still, the amount of things that happened to me over the years that were huge red flags that should have been wake up calls to say, what are you doing? You need to sort yourself out. And I didn't listen to them. I didn't look at them. I ignored them, and I carried on. And I carried on to the point that when I was 28 years old, I had, over the past 3 years, maybe 2 or 3 years, up until that point, there was this kind of subconscious voice in the back of my head that was basically saying, this isn't right. What you're doing isn't right. I was definitely in a higher position, more responsibility by this point. And eventually one day that voice kind of broke its way forward a little bit after a night of staying up and drinking and taking drugs. And I had to go for a relaxing weekend away back up in the Lake District. We went to do some hiking with some friends. And I turned up at the train station having not slept, I was just a mess. And one of my friends said to me quite bluntly, you need to sort your life out. And I didn't like that at the time. I really didn't like it. I didn't like being spoken to like that. I thought I was fine, but it took a few days. And I remember the train I got back to London, I was sat there thinking, yeah, do you know what? I think this is the time. I need to take a break. Not stop forever, just take a break. And I did. And after 2 days, I wanted to go to the pub. I wanted to have a beer. And I tried to get a friend to join me, and he knew I wanted to stop for a week, so he didn't let me go. I was really frustrated at the time, but I said fine. I went home and I thought, go on, let me try and get through a week. And at this time I was running a bar, and every night we would drink, every single night. And then my days off I would drink. So even just to go 2 or 3 days was big for me. A week was unheard of in a long time. But I managed to do a week. And I remember at the end of that week, I felt great. I felt really good, to the point that I said, well, let me do another week. So I did 2 weeks. And then I was faced with a decision to make. I was going on a date, and I rehearsed it in my head over and over that I was going to tell her, I'm not going to drink. And we met up and we were walking towards the bar. And I said, oh, in my head, I'm like, just say it, just say it. And I said, listen, we're going to have a good night, but just to let you know, I'm not going to drink. And she was Australian. They like to drink. She said, no, absolutely not. You're drinking tonight. And I was like, I remember saying, please just don't make me drink. And she said, "Listen, if you're adamant in not drinking, you can stop tomorrow morning, but not tonight." And I thought, well, do you know what? I'm not going to stop forever because that's ridiculous. Like, how can you stop drinking forever? What about birthdays, weddings? Like, there's no way you can stop drinking forever. So I thought, instead of having to go through and challenge all of that, let me make it easy on myself. I'm just going to go back to it. And I went back to it. And to be honest, I had a really good night. It was fun. I did get a bit drunk, nothing outrageous, but it was enough to make me feel rough the next day. And after having 2 weeks of feeling really good, really energetic, to then wake up with a hangover and suddenly this rush of anxiety came back, I thought, no, I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. And I remember I went out for a coffee to a little cafe close to where I lived. And I remember saying to myself consciously, that's it, you're done. This is now your top priority. There's no more mental debates of should I drink, should I not drink, maybe just have a couple. What about this? Like, none of that. I made it incredibly black and white. And I said, I no longer drink. It's as simple as that. If there's anything that ever conflicts with my top priority, I don't even give it a second thought. It's just a no. Not drinking is now my top priority. And that was 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago.
Do you feel like you have an addictive personality? You mentioned substance use, but you related to your career as well. I get the feeling that you were very passionate and determined to do something in the restaurant industry. Do you think that that's kind of an addictive element within your personality that has resulted you to kind of quit drinking because of the habit that you've developed within that?
Well, this is what's interesting. When I was drinking and I was taking drugs a lot, I was also binging with sugar. Like, especially, I used to love, do you remember the flapjacks, like golden syrup oats? And I used to go and get like a little box of flapjacks and I would eat 1 to 2 big tubs of them a night. Like, I literally, once I started, I couldn't stop. And it was exactly the same thing that happened in my mind when I drank, when I smoked, when I took drugs. And there's a lot of, that term is very popular, the addictive personality, whereas I don't think it is part of your personality. I think it is something inside of you for sure. Because I know it is, because otherwise I would go have the ability to go back to drinking now and be okay. But I know as soon as I have one, it changes me. It changes something in my brain. It turns me into a different person. I have no control then. And that's what made it easy. Just by not having that first one, I never had to deal with it. So, there are people out there like me, maybe even listening to this, who struggle to moderate. And, in my eyes, there's a lot of people out there that cannot moderate. I'm one of them. I've never been anyone else. I've only ever been me, but I know how that feels, that you're unable to moderate. And it's from the outside now, it's so obvious. Yet it took me years and years and years to realize it and accept it. But I do believe there is something, it might even be genetically embodied within us, that makes us different to other people. And I know some people can go out and, it's a common thing. You go out either in your teenage years or your 20s and you get super, super drunk. It gets wild, especially at university. That was a big time for me. But then as you go on, I also don't think we should accept that as the norm, even though it is the norm. Yeah. We kind of accept it as if, oh, that's fine. You're young. You're meant to do that. Yeah. What if you didn't? What if you spent your time being productive and determined and actually creating the life you want, instead of potentially wasting a lot of time putting yourself into a darker place? But I see people that, they grow out of that and they go, oh yeah, I was young, now I'm different. Whereas I'm quite happy I went the way I was, because for me, alcohol, like I've said, it was a tool to escape. And a lot of people say to me, why don't you go back to it? Why don't you go back and just moderate it? But for me, I don't see the point of that. For me, it was there for one purpose, and that was to get me blacked out and to get me out of my mind. If I'm not going to take it to that extreme, I don't see the point of it. I don't want to be slightly tipsy. I either want to be on the ball, focused, or out of my mind. Those are my two options. And it is a trait that I carry over, like I do adapt it to my life, but now I direct it in a very positive way. I apply it to exercise, to meditation, to breathing, to having ice cold showers and ice baths. And that's kind of taking that side of me and then focusing it in a much more productive and positive way.
I was out with a couple of friends a couple of months back, and I remember one of my friends saying, I remember his comment on the WhatsApp group. It was real nice night, couple of pints, nice curry, and went home. And it was kind of just like, I remember thinking that you had about 7 or 8 points. Look, that's a lot, you know. And but he in his head, it was like a normal, chilled, not wild weekend, if that makes sense. And it kind of
Mm,
relates to that question around what moderation is and can we moderate? I think that's hard to kind of know what our limits are and when is enough or what is binge drinking. I think there's an issue with that, especially in the UK.
yeah. I mean, you look at the slogan for drinking in this country, which is drink responsibly. Drink responsibly. And yet, the longer I've not drank for, the more interest I've actually had in it.
Mm,
And it's over the past year I've started to look at the actual physical and psychological effects that this drug has on our bodies and on our minds. And if you look at it in that perspective, it doesn't bring any positives. It doesn't help your body in any way. In fact, it goes the other way. It hinders you from doing not just consistent exercise. You spend too much money. It ruins, can damage relationship with friends and family. There's so many negatives that come from drinking. Yet we say drink responsibly. So for me, I'm always confused. What is responsible? For me, responsible is not having it at all. But that can't be something you write from an alcoholic company. The most responsible thing is don't drink it at all. So they have these guidelines, and I don't think I've ever met anyone in my life who knows what they are, understands them, and actually stays to them. It's just
mm,
not done, and that's because alcohol is there for a purpose. If you talk about non-alcoholic beers or non-alcoholic wine, most drinkers would say absolutely not. That's disgusting. Where it's exactly the same flavor, the same taste. Most of them, some of them are awful. I agree. It's the same taste, but it's missing the key ingredient, and that ingredient alters your reality. So it's not necessarily because we enjoy the drink, it's because it contains something in it which helps us alter our reality. And when I stopped, it took me a long time to understand why I used to want to drink so much. Why did I want to change my reality? Why did I want to escape it? Because if everything was okay, surely I wouldn't want to. And it's something I get asked every now and again is what about special occasions? What if you had a special occasion? Would you drink? And for me, that is the most obvious time never to drink, because it's so special. I want to be present with it. I want to be there. I want to enjoy it. I want to remember it. And I don't want to have any bad memories of recovering the next day. I want it to be all positive. And I never want to feel like I'm getting further away from that. I say to a lot of people, one of the best ways to imagine this is think of yourself in the best version, that version of yourself that you wish you could be, the one you wish you could achieve. For me, it was the one that had a healthy diet, waking up early, driven, exercising, all the things that I couldn't do because alcohol stopped me. And if you think of that version of yourself, every time you have a drink, you're getting one drink away from that person every single drink. And it's hard not to feel a certain level of guilt when you go back to it with that, because you think, every time I have a drink, I'm just getting further away from the person which I could truly become and I have the potential to become. But instead, I'm choosing this. And yeah, that's kind of the way I see it nowadays. I've never had that mindset while drinking because I developed it after I stopped, but I imagine that's what it would be like to go back having that in my head.
Talk to me about the real rewiring of your thinking around alcohol. You mentioned that you stopped and that there was obstacles in the way you mentioned your Australian date, but we talked about addictive personality. You mentioned sugar and other things as well. Did you have to kind of rewire your brain completely to stop alcohol, and did that kind of have a domino effect on other things? I'm just intrigued to kind of hear your thought processes around how to stop a substance and dealing with that change, in terms of a mindset and mental health, etc.
Yeah. Well, looking back now, there was definitely a almost an awakening within myself, a self-realization of what was going on and that I didn't have to keep choosing this life. Now, when I stopped, I did it purely because I couldn't bear the negatives anymore, the negatives of basically the deteriorating mental health I had. That was the reason why I stopped. I didn't really focus on how much better life was going to get. I just wanted that to stop. I couldn't deal with the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment, the fear of waking up and thinking, what have I done? Getting texts off people. And it all became too much. And I was upsetting friends. But then I got to a point, I stopped and I started to feel really good. And I thought, okay, this is good. Now I just need to learn how to live without it, and in my mind, there was absolutely no way I was going to go back to it. So no matter what challenges I faced, I had to find a way around them. There was no question in my mind. And it was probably about a month or so in, I remember getting incredibly stressed because I didn't have my off button anymore. That off switch in my head had disappeared and I didn't really know how to replace it. So I was constantly finding different ways to do that. Exercise was always a part of my life. I loved it. It's why I went to do sports technology at university. It was because I loved exercise. And now I was exercising with consistency, but not because I wanted to look better, which had been the previous motive for so long, but because I actually wanted to feel better. I was no longer numbing myself, so I could actually feel the benefits mentally of exercising on a regular basis. I also got myself looking into meditation and breathing techniques, and the cold water was a big one. All these things which really helped calm that overactive mind of mine that was always, something that I wanted to escape, just to kind of switch off for a bit. And once I kind of found all these different tools or techniques, whatever you would call them, I realized that was kind of my new drug. That was what I could do to not just calm myself down, but also point myself in such a good direction. And instead of thinking about the big journey, if you stop drinking, how's it going to be? I broke it down just day to day. It's what we do from when we wake up to when we go to sleep, which is so important. Because if you have your daily routine, your morning routine, your evening routine, everything set, then it makes everything so much easier. For me, even waking up in a morning back in my drinking days and going to work was just the biggest. I don't know what the word. It was just so difficult. I had to really get motivation to do it. Whereas now I wake up, you can spring out of bed, you feel good, you feel hydrated, well fed, do a bit of exercise, and you're like ready to attack the day. Whereas before I was kind of just grinding my way through, just dragging my body and my mind. It was not a pleasant experience just to be here in a sense. I was very much unable to be by myself. I didn't like, I'd never faced anything within myself. I'd never challenged myself. So I love to surround myself with people. And if those people were there to give me compliments in some way, it would drown my ego to forget about this stuff. And, one of the biggest challenges you face when you stop drinking is your friendship circle. It's one of the biggest worries. What do I do if I tell my friends I'm not drinking? Are they going to want to still be my friends? Do I feel excluded? Do I feel isolated? And I realized that when I stopped, a lot of the people I was hanging around with on a regular basis were not actually my friends, but people who looked up to me for how much I could drink. They looked up to me to how much I could take drugs. And once I stopped, they just kind of drifted away. And you'd think a good friend wouldn't drift away just because you're trying to improve your life. The good friends I had, they stayed with me and they're still with me now, 5 years on. But those that you enable, or maybe the ones that are enabling you, yeah, they just don't fit into your life anymore. And I think one of the best ways you can get to a point where you can picture yourself with that different life, from going from drinking to excess to turning it into a positive direction, is by changing who you believe yourself to be. It's our identity is how we base everything we do, our thoughts, our reactions, our decisions. Everything comes from who we believe ourselves to be. And there's a quote that I love from the great Tony Robbins, which is, the strongest force in the human personality is the need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves. And I truly agree with that. When you hear people say, oh, that's not me, or I'm not very good at this, that's because that you believe you're not. But what if you strip away this belief and you go, yeah, maybe I'm all right at it. And then you try it and you keep trying it until you are good at it. And the more we define ourselves into these smaller boxes of who we are, the harder it becomes to break free. But that's basically, at the time I didn't realize it, but now I do. That's what I did. I changed my identity. I was no longer the party guy. I was no longer the one that stayed up the latest or drank the most. I was now the one that woke up early and exercised and was motivated and driven and passionate about whatever I was doing. And I did it with intention. So I think a deep change of belief of who you are is imperative to make that substantial, long-lasting change to your life.
Talk to me about the relationships that you formed with alcohol with other people. I'm a big believer of you're a product of your own environment. And I think you mentioned then that you don't need to be surrounded by people. You can kind of find yourself in a place where you think inner. And some people struggle with that. And I think some people um, resist the element of being alone and identifying what they want to be and who they are. And then that creeps into other habits such as drinking and drugs, etc., because they're around people that do that. What would advice would you give to someone that wants to kind of do it the polite way of, moving on and self-development, but at the same time needs to realize that the people that they hang around with are not important to them in terms of their future commitments? Have you had any experiences on that? Well, you clearly have had experiences of that. I'm just intrigued to see how you went around that because it can be a big obstacle for some.
Yeah, to be honest, that was probably one of my biggest obstacles and the one thing which I enjoyed the most about my journey. Like I said, I was really unable to sit with myself or be with myself. I used to get scared going to the supermarket alone. Because I was like, what if I see someone? Am I going to act normal? And it would bring up the social anxiety. And I think I used to keep people around me almost to avoid that anxiety of being alone. The irony was, when I was surrounding myself with these people, I'd never felt so isolated in my life. It was only when I stopped drinking um, that I got to a point that I remember it was a couple of months in, and I thought, I really, I've got a couple of weeks off work, and I really want to go away. And there was a place in the south of France I'd really wanted to go to, but there was no one to go with. I didn't have a girlfriend, and all my friends were working. And I remember thinking, it's so annoying. I just want to go on holiday, but there's no one to go with. And I think it was a couple of days I sat on it and just went, oh, why don't you go by yourself? Can you go by yourself? Is it weird? It's a bit weird. And I thought, no, do you know what? I'm going to do it. And I booked a flight to France. There was a place I was really looking forward to visiting. I hired a car, drove up to the middle of nowhere in south of France, stayed in a cabin by a lake, just completely by myself. And it was one of the most surreal experiences to be completely alone, especially in a country where at the time I didn't speak French. My girlfriend now is French, so I still can't speak it, but I'm a little bit better. But it was just fascinating to be there and just to be like, I remember there was no Wi-Fi either, so I had no connection with anyone. And I was truly by myself. And yet for the first time, I felt so content within myself. And it's something I truly believe that if you're not able to sit with yourself, you're never going to achieve that next level of being content or being happy because you're not happy with yourself. And I was not happy with myself for a long time. And I know that a lot of people that drink to that extreme are in the same position. It was only once I kind of reconnected with myself and I felt comfortable within myself that I was able to really start mending a lot of the stuff which I might have damaged over the years. And I spent a week in France. I then flew over to Portugal. I spent a bit of time in Portugal to go and see one of my favorite bands play live. And I went home and I just remember thinking, wow, it wasn't as scary as I thought to be alone. Suddenly now going to the supermarket seems like a doddle, it's crazy. And I ended up actually 6 months later booking a flight to India and traveling Asia by myself for a year. And it was an experience I would never have had if I still relied on other people. And going back to your question of the relationships you form when you're in that drinking phase, looking back, there was times where I would be in a bar completely out of my mind, and there'd be a group of maybe 6 people next to me, and I'd invite them back to my flat. No one else. I've got no friends there. It's just me, and I invite these people back, and I'll be sat there till the early hours, all doing cocaine, all chatting, and every 10 minutes, me and one of them will ask each other's name again because we're struggling to form any short-term memories. So I spend the whole night with loads of strangers in my house, constantly asking them what their names are, and then pretending like we're all best friends, hugging each other, and I never see them again. And at the time, I used to see that as kind of like a cool thing, like, oh yeah, I just hung out with some randoms and we had a great time. And I was like, I don't see what purpose that is bringing to my life. Am I forming deep connections, or is it uh, narcotic induced connections? I can't even remember their names. How can they be good connections? Um, and some of those connections hang around for a lot longer. There was one person in particular I was friends with for 4 years. And when I stopped, I realized we used to see each other probably once a week, sometimes twice a week for 4 years. And not once did I ever meet that person without drinking and without taking drugs. And as soon as I stopped, I haven't heard from him. I think we may have sent a message here or there, but that's like two messages in 5 years because I was a different person. I'd realized the life I was living was not who I was. And I've heard people say that that's what depression can be. It's you're living a fake life, an inauthentic life. And that's something which I really, really am adamant about myself is I am as authentic as I can possibly be. I don't want to put on a facade. I don't want to pretend to be someone else. I'm done with that. I did years of that. Now I'm at a point where I'm like, this is me. People like it. Amazing. If you don't like it, amazing. It became irrelevant. And this was one of the things that was most fascinating was when I was drinking, I was always searching for that external validation. I wanted people to like me. I really craved it. And once I stopped drinking and built up a really strong foundation of confidence, I started to get a lot more attention because people could feed off that energy. But by this time, I didn't need it because I get my validation from within myself now.
Mm.
And it was just this irony that as soon as I started to get it, I didn't need it. It was kind of frustrating, but also quite liberating and freeing at the same time.
You said that you didn't love yourself, and you mentioned the anxiety element. Where do you think that comes from? Was it uh, childhood? Was it experiences at a younger age? Or I'm just intrigued to hear your mindset and how you kind of really started to understand why. Because again, some people might relate to this. They might be in a position where they're using other, they're covering the cracks with alcohol,
Mm,
um, but they don't necessarily understand why they might feel down or they might feel worthless or they might not give themselves, um, they don't build their self-esteem. I'm just intrigued to kind of get your thought processes around that, how you got to understand why those elements were a problem for you and you turn to external things to make yourself feel better for the short term, but obviously impacts the long.
yeah, well, like you say, why didn't you love yourself? I think it's because I didn't really know myself. I'd spent so many years detached from who I truly was. And, we live in an age of anxiety massively. Anxiety used to come and it's there for a reason. We used to use it as cavemen to be worried if we were going to get killed or it's a tool. It's part of your body saying something is not right. Something is about to happen. Be careful, be aware. Whereas when I was a teenager, I didn't really know, I didn't do the process or the work to realize what it was I was actually afraid of. And therefore, I had this feeling which we're almost shamed into thinking that you shouldn't be anxious, that it's not a feeling we should feel. But of course it is. It's a natural instinct in our bodies, but we just have to understand why we're feeling it when maybe we shouldn't be feeling it. And the easy way to quiet down that feeling is to drink. It's again, alcohol is an incredible tool to do that. You get drunk, you don't care. You're not worried. Every time I was drunk, I was never worried about, oh, am I the center of attention? And most times I was the center of attention, and it was never for a good reason. But again, we live in the age of social media. You look at everyone's Instagram, everyone's posting all the best things about their life. So when you're hungover or on a come down and you're lying on your couch and you're like, oh my God, I'm worthless. What am I doing? And then you look and every single one of your friends is living like Dan Bilzerian, and you're like, Jesus, it pushes you further into that anxiety loop. And the truth is that anxiety comes because, we're worried. We're worried about the future for some reason. And that side of that part of our brain, whichever part it is basically telling us a story. And usually it's the worst case scenario. The amount of times I would worry about things which never even happened, it just seems so stupid. I would spend days or sometimes weeks really, really worried, and it would either not happen or it would happen completely differently. And it just was such a waste of mental energy. And, getting down into it, I did have a few therapy sessions when I was in my teenage years. I think late teens, to try and understand what was causing me to have panic attacks. You know, I was having, we worked it out. I was having well over 100, maybe even over 200 panic attacks a day. Like, it was intense. So I thought, okay, let's think of the worst case scenario. What are you worried about? I was worried that everyone was going to see that I was having a panic attack and laugh, and it would be humiliating. But it happened quite often. People did see it. I was, you know, blushing quite a lot, and I was shaky. I was nervous. And I thought, okay, well, if someone finds that funny, why, like, what happens then? Like, is it because they really don't want the best for me? Is it because they're not a friend? And let's say the one thing I realized was I was thinking about myself and worrying about myself just as much as everyone else was worrying about them. This was one of the biggest things I realized when I stopped drinking was, wow, it's not just me. I'm not, you know, the whole world was about me and what's going on inside my head. And then once I realized that everyone else was in the exact same mindset, it almost makes you invisible because everyone's worried about them. They're not worried about you. And it kind of gave me this new lease of life and confidence to be like, do you know what? No one cares. No one cares what's going on with me in the nicest possible way. No one cares. You know, there was a book I read. I can't remember which book it was, but it said, isn't it strange how you'll probably care more about a spot on your forehead than you do about 10,000 people dying in Africa? You would genuinely care more about your facial appearance. And it's not a negative thing. It's just the way it is, because we live inside our own heads, and we are the main characters of our world. Everything that happens to us is like the biggest thing ever. And yet everyone's doing it. Everyone thinks the same way. And it really helped me to rationalize my anxiety and think, I'm just worried about me because I'm not worried about anyone else. But in a sense, that actually is what made it better, you know, to get outside of my head. And that's one thing I can tell when it happens to me now is if I get a bit too much inside my own head, I need to get myself out to talk about it. The worst thing you can do is not speak about it. And I was brought up to be stoic. You know, you're a guy, you don't talk about this stuff. You know, it's a sign of weakness. And all that does is it ruminates in your head and gets worse and worse and worse. And this is why we're seeing, you know, record suicide rates in this country, because we're not encouraged to talk about this stuff. And yet the first time I did actually go to a couple of AA meetings when I first stopped, just to see what they were like. My first meeting, I spoke for about 10 minutes. I don't really remember it. I think I blacked out because it was just so intense. I just brought up everything I'd ever thought of. And I just spoke about it for 10 minutes straight. My adrenaline was fueled because I'm like, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. These are things I've had in the back of my head for years. And at the end of me talking about it, all I ever got was, thank you. And I was like, what? Is that it? Like, this is some of the darkest stuff I've ever thought of. And everyone else is treating it as normal, probably because it is normal. It's the same stuff that everyone thinks about. And yet I've just spoken about it. And that's one thing I did love about it, is you have the safe space to talk about it. And that's exactly what I do now. I create this environment which is safe, where people can go and talk about this stuff. And there's no judgment. And there's no judgment because we were probably as bad as each other. You know, I always think of myself as I was probably worse than you, because I did go quite extreme, especially on a few occasions. But I found that to be incredibly useful. As soon as you talk about it, it gets it out of your head, it normalizes it. And it's almost like the exposure to hearing it, and it makes it real. And you go, okay, now it's out. I've spoken about it. It doesn't have to stay in here anymore. And it was an incredibly powerful way to deal with things. And that's why therapy exists. Although just the word therapy has such a stigma around it in this country. You know, it's basically why we do anything. You know, we drink alcohol because it's therapeutic. It self-soothes us. So drinking is therapy. Everything we do to make ourselves feel better is a form of therapy. It doesn't have to be sat in a room talking to someone for £180 an hour.
Will, I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts on those that might not be as extreme as you've kind of made out over the course of the last 45 minutes. There might be people, I think they're called middle lane drinkers, where they drink for the Friday, Saturday. They might have a bit of a few drinks here, there, and there on the weekend, and then back to work on the Monday, and life continues, and it's that kind of that routine. And holidays come about and you mentioned celebrations and alcohol is used then. I'm intrigued to hear your views on those that might be in that middle lane where they they kind of got the habit of drinking alcohol, but they understand that actually it might be impacting them in terms of stress, it might be impacting them in terms of anxiety and well-being and health. What advice would you give to those? Because I think those that hear the word sobriety, they kind of believe that they don't have a problem. And in reality, like we said around moderation, there could be a problem there or it could be a growing problem just because of the nature of alcohol and how accessible it is and the culture of the UK and have a drink, go on, have one, two, three, four, and it kind of leads to a heavy binge. I'm just intrigued to hear your views on that, on those that might not necessarily see themselves as having a problem, but drink a lot.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, the middle lane drinkers, as we call them, are actually the ones which I enjoy to help the most because they face the biggest challenge. For those who are similar to me and would take it to the excess, sooner or later, you're going to get to a crossroads where you're going to see things are starting to get bad and you're going to have to make a decision. It has to be a brash decision. And I consider myself lucky in that respect because I went from extreme to extreme. I went from extreme unhappiness to extreme happiness. And I'm very happy with my life now. But what if you're right? What if you're that person that just has a couple of beers? You can't really justify not drinking because it's not a problem. And there's a lot of stigma, I agree, around this world, the word sobriety, the word alcoholic, the word problem. And I don't like to use those words. I do use the word problem. And but to label yourself, I didn't agree with. And that's why I didn't stay with AA. I don't agree with the term alcoholic. I don't want to define myself by this term. I don't consider myself an addict. I don't like these labels. I had a problem. And I put it as simply as a problem is basically to do something which has a negative impact on your life and then return to do it. That becomes a problem. And alcohol, as I've established already, only really has negative impacts on your life. I still, the only positive I would ever think of is it calms you down and it can and make you more social, let's say. However, that's what we see as being the positive. But the positive that comes out of not drinking is the connections you make in a social situation are 10 times better without alcohol because you're fully present, you're fully aware, and you're fully yourself to make those connections. So I agree. There are so many people in this country that will just, maybe finish work, go home, have a couple of beers here, have a couple of glasses of wine there. And it never gets to that point to justify it. But then you think, what does justify it? Who are we justifying it to? And for me, I used to want people. I was praying that people would see that I wasn't well. I was praying that people would see that I was out of control, which was difficult because I was a master of deception. No one saw what was going on because I hid it so well. And those that are really struggling, like really struggling, they hide it really well. I know they do. And it makes it harder because when you stop, like when I stopped, people would say, well, you didn't have a problem. You were absolutely fine. And it's for me, the only justification you need to stop alcohol is if it's not serving you anymore. If you want that better life. And a lot of these middle lane drinkers aren't happy with their drinking, but they feel like they need an excuse. But the only excuse you need is that you want to stop. And it becomes as simple as that. And there's things, when I stopped drinking, people would ask why. And I found it really interesting that we are now a culture where we have to justify why we don't want to take a drug instead of why we want to take it. And I used to get angry and be like, well, maybe I should ask them, why do you drink? And I'm like, no, it's nothing to do with them. People want to know why I stopped drinking. And it's simple. I'm a better person without it. And for me, that phrase said everything because if they wanted to get me drinking again, if my friends pushed me back into it, they're basically saying, I don't want you to be a better person. And that made no sense to me. Another friend of mine says that when people ask him, he just says, it slows me down. And it's the implication that alcohol stops us progressing. And that's all we're trying to do, right? There are people out there that are very happy with their day-to-day life. It's the same routine, exactly the same. But then there's other people that actually want to progress and do better, become more successful, to make more money, all these different things. But alcohol hinders all of this. But you don't have to be this career-driven person to see the benefits from it. the relationships with your family, your friends, your spouse, everything improves. Your sleep improves, your diet improves. It's hard to see it as not a no-brainer when it's on paper, because it really is. And I didn't even think about this, for maybe the first couple of years when I stopped. I remember life got so much better, but I never actually sat down and thought, wow, what has improved? And it just started to become more and more obvious that you don't have to be an extremist like myself to justify stopping. We see it in this country as you either are a full-blown alcoholic and you drink in the mornings and you drink by yourself, or you're absolutely fine and there's nothing in between, because we normalize binge drinking. We normalize going out and getting wasted, not just normalize it, but we encourage it. And when you encourage it, where's the line? I remember I was running a bar in London and we would all drink in that bar. Everyone was wasted. And yet one night, it was after I stopped, I told someone that I was going to go to Asia for a while. And she said, well, what you do to stop getting food poisoning, have a shot of whiskey after every meal. And I said, oh, no, I don't drink anymore. And she went, oh, I'm so sorry. Did you have a problem? And she's asking me, but she's already about 10 drinks deep, slurring her words. And I'm like, well, where's the line? Where do we consider it a problem? It's Tuesday and you're tanked. And you're saying that I've got, like, it just made no sense. But again, a problem is defined by how we define it. I sometimes have a problem with my sleep, with my diet, with my relationships. It's no more a problem. In fact, it's more of a problem to drink. It could be the biggest problem we have in terms of our happiness and our health. And yet we really struggle to admit it ever being a problem because of the stigma that word contains. Because we see it as being like, right, well, if you've got a problem with alcohol, then you've got to go to rehab, you've got to go to AA, and you've got to live the rest of your life admitting that you've got some sort of disease. And that was a side that I didn't want to, I didn't like that. I don't have to do it. And it's the idea that we have to follow certain rules. We don't. The only mission of everything we're doing here is to be happier and healthier. And if you can do that without alcohol, do it.
Do you still go to clubs and pubs? Do you still put yourself in those environments?
Very interesting question, because when I stopped, I did not want my life to change. I ran a bar. I loved going out. And to be honest, I was very good at still going out, and I did. I used to love going out. And to be honest, I still do love going out. However, once you remove alcohol or drugs from a situation or a night out, you've got to think, what's the point of it? Why do we go out? Is it the music? Is it the food? Is it the company? Is it the conversation? Like, what is it? What is it specifically we like on a night out? And for me, it was alcohol. It was drugs. I loved the feeling of it, or at least I thought I did. I loved to escape. So I still used to go out. I even, when I was in Bangkok, I remember going to a 14-hour rave and I just had 2 Red Bulls and that was it. I loved it. Because on that night and all these specific nights had something for me. That night was dancing. Like, I loved it. I go to some places where the drinks are actually amazing, and non-alcoholic drinks. If I'm going out with a good friend, doesn't matter where we go, as long as I'm with a good friend, like, there's got to be something. And eventually, after a while, I really wanted to prove to myself that I could go out without drinking and actually have fun. But eventually, when it's 2 a.m. and all your mates are absolutely out of their minds and it's a horrible, sticky club, and you're like, to be honest, I think I'd rather be in bed and wake up early and get some stuff done, or just relax. Am I here just because I'm trying to prove that I'm fun?
Mm.
And it was this idea that if I didn't go out, I would feel like I'm excluded. But I didn't take that victim mentality like I was the odd one out. I went, no, I'm going to wake up early. I'm going to do some really cool, fun stuff. And those are the guys that are missing out, because they're going to be hungover. They're going to be in bed. I'm now the one that's actually creating my own world. And eventually the right people will drift towards you and the wrong people will drift away. And that's basically what happened. And now my friendship group is so much stronger because everyone in it is positive and honest and just trying to better themselves as well. Eventually I'm not going to lie, your world changes. Of course it changes when you stop drinking. If you, like I was, surround yourself with not even extreme drinkers, just normal drinkers, we go to the pub, we have a few beers, and suddenly you don't do that, your world will change. But I can guarantee you it changes for the better every single time. Everyone who's done it, I've seen, their world gets better. The friendships get better. There are difficult challenges, no doubt. But obviously, to become better and to become happier, it's not always the easiest of routes. but it's so worth it. Definitely worth it.
Have you ever had conflict around that um, stigma with sobriety that you're boring, you don't have fun anymore? Have you ever had comments on that? And again, I took a year off alcohol last year,
Good for
and
you.
that was something that was kind of brought into kind of the a passing comment, like a bit of a banter comment, And I remember thinking to myself, I'm still doing the same things, but just not with a drink in my hand. And I think it's more of a judgment of them, like you said, the experiences that you had on the Tuesday night with that woman with a lot of drink in her. I think it's more of a judgment of them. But I found that a challenge. I used to take that personally,
Yeah,
and I think with maturity, if I was to do it again, I'd probably think differently around that. I'm just intrigued to hear how you cope with that, because obviously you're trying to
yeah.
change your identity, you're trying to change your future, but that can be something that kind of drags you down a little bit, and keeping that persistence is obviously key.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. That was my biggest hurdle because that's what I was most concerned about. And I think that's why I found dating to be the scariest part of not drinking because what if I go on a date and they say that I'm boring?
Mm.
And people did mention that over the years, there was so many times, even I had it last year and I met someone and she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I help people who struggle with alcohol or drugs." And she was drinking a margarita at the time and she just laughed. She didn't say anything, she just laughed. And I remember I'm now at a point where, in the beginning I was very scared about that. And I'm like, what about it? But now I have such a bedrock of confidence with what I'm doing. I think it bothered me a little bit that day, but nothing really. I just thought, okay, you're not the person who I want to spend my time with because we just have different views. That's it. But I understand why you're saying it because I used to say it. I used to say it to people. So if I knew
Mm.
why I was saying it, I knew why other people were saying it.
Yeah.
And I was saying it because I was projecting. I was 100% projecting my own insecurities of being like, no, all I'm saying is actually, I'll be boring if I don't drink. You're saying that basically without alcohol, everyone's boring. But that's obviously not true. So the idea that we have to be drunk to be interesting was interesting to me because, I used to take it personally at the beginning until I realized where it comes from. It's nothing to do with you. All you're doing is putting a reflection up against them and they're going to tell you how they feel about it. And this was one thing I really struggled with because if someone tells you you're boring, it's really hard not to take it personally.
Yeah.
Someone is directly looking in you in the eyes and saying you're boring. You're like, okay. But then once I understood it, it really stripped away any emotion to it. And even nowadays, when I put what I put out on social media, it gets negativity. I mean, overwhelmingly positive, but it still does attract some negativity. And the same negative comments come from a very similar type of person. And to be honest, there are women that do it, but a lot of it is male. And a lot of them remind me of my old self. And when I hear that, I don't get offended by it. All I think is, you might need help one day. You might be someone that actually changes because that's happened to me. I've had people that criticized me in my sobriety who are now part of my community who I help. And I remember the first time that happened was a real affirmation to me that, yeah, I was right. These people that kick out the hardest are the ones that might need the most help.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
when I see it that way, there's no anger. It's more just, I feel sorry for someone trapped in the same mentality that I was trapped in, which is thinking that if you don't do what I'm doing, you must be boring. And that's because if I don't do it, I'm afraid that I'll be boring, and
Mm.
this is why people kick out. This is why there is so much trolling on the internet these days, because these people are not happy with themselves. If you were truly happy with yourself and the way you live your life, why would you ever care what anyone else is doing? And that's the position I'm now in, I like whatever anyone else does with their life, as long as it doesn't affect me in a negative way, then you do you, man. You do you. That's, whatever's best for you. And as long as it's not interfering negatively with anyone's life as well. Not just saying, as long as it's not me, it's fine. But with anyone, you get to a point which I know I'm at where, if someone does something I don't like, I think fine. I just don't want to consume that information in my world. The idea that people actively go onto other people's accounts and negatively charge comments, it's like, well, surely this has triggered you in some form, otherwise you wouldn't even be here. If I see something I don't like, I just leave it and carry on with my life. Life's too short.
Some people's only hobby is to drink. And I think
Mm,
if you take that away, all of a sudden there's a realization of I've got loads of time that can be overwhelming, and then people return to the drink. What advice would you give around that in terms of filling time? Because I'm a big believer that if you are to go sober, you need to fill it with something to enhance your experience and enhance your lifestyle. I think that kind of is important, but some people might not know how to deal with that transition. Did you ever come across that when you kind of stopped and then all of a sudden you have to find new things?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I believe that only came from someone who has taken a break themselves, and you probably found yourself with so much time because
Yeah,
I did. It was especially Sunday mornings. You'd wake up at 8 a.m. and you think, why am I awake? There's nothing to do. And like you say, some people see drinking as their hobby. And I truly believe that's because there's no time to develop any other hobbies when drinking is your hobby. And once you strip alcohol away, you have all this time to focus on what you truly want. When we're growing up as kids, we never think to ourselves, oh, when I grow up, I don't want any hobbies. I just want to drink as my hobby. That's going to be my hobby. It doesn't happen. Drink becomes the hobby and it eliminates any chance of having any other ones. And it was something I found to have that time. And you're right, it can be overwhelming. And that's why when I first started doing this, I created a 3-week course. And I think it was day 7. It started on a Monday. So Sunday was the day 7. And it was just called All This Time or something like that. So it was basically, it's now Sunday. You're going to realize you've got so much more time. How are we going to fill it? So you kind of preempt that. So you don't just wake up and think, wow, I feel a bit lost. But there are definite steps that I've found which can really help someone who is looking to make that decision. It goes from the vocabulary you use, the way you perceive every situation to understand what your temptation triggers are. Why do you feel social pressure? Is it external pressure? Is it internal pressure? All these different things I developed, and I actually made a workshop which is found in my community. I put in there that basically takes people through the steps of do this, do this, do this, and you will give yourself the best chance possible of breaking free from it. And it's very logical and practical. And that's basically the way that I like to think and to approach this, even though there is a huge emotional attachment we have to these things. And once you step out of it, it becomes incredibly clear. But if we make very logical and practical changes to our life, we give ourselves the best chance. And for some, I always say, in those early days when you're trying to change your lifestyle, maybe even rethink who you are as a person, it's important probably not to put yourself in these high risk situations. It's dry January is a classic example. 2 weeks ago, people decided, I'm going to go a month without drinking. But they don't sit and think about what that actually looks like, what it feels like. How are you going to deal with that situation? Or why is this person saying this to you? And most people go out with all the best intentions in the world. And the first Saturday or the first Friday night, they go to the pub and they'll be strong, maybe for a couple of drinks. And then someone will go, oh, go on, just have one. And you go, go on, then what am I doing? Even dry January, it's crazy. And then you have one. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh man, I can't believe I did that. And it's because there's been no effort or time put into really understanding why you would go back to it and what is your drives to go back. So there are quite a few things I've found which do help anyone who's thinking about taking a break and taking that step. But for me, one of the biggest was just positivity. Don't focus on the negatives, focus on the positivity of what life could be like. And this was another reason which I never liked to go into the programs or to the meetings, because as a drinker, even it doesn't have to be a heavy drinker, even a light drinker or a infrequent drinker, there is shame, there is guilt, there is embarrassment sometimes around our relationship with it. And when you stop drinking, it makes no sense. You're doing the opposite thing. Why still feel shame and guilt and all these emotions? It should be a different experience completely. It should be a positive one. So going to a meeting where we just kind of reopen that wound of shame over and over, it didn't seem to help me. I felt like I wanted to be there for these people because everyone was having a tough time, but there must be another way to do this, which is a more logical and positive approach to it. And that was my mindset. I was like, I'm not focusing on the negatives of what my life might be like maybe I won't be invited to this, or maybe this will be uncomfortable. No, this is amazing because now I can wake up early, I can save money, I can sort my diet out, I can work out every day. I just focused on those positives
Yeah.
And instead of being something like you're missing out on something, in fact, you're gaining so much more. So you
Mm.
focus on that, it makes it a lot easier.
Last question, Will.
Go on.
I'm intrigued about your future because you mentioned a lot about your past. And what I tend to do on every podcast is I either get my guests to look back or look forward. But I think with you, it's more looking forward because I think what you've emphasized in terms of your journey so far, there is a lot more to come. In terms of your social media account and your training and your inspiration to others. So where do you see yourself in the future? Yeah, where do you see this going in terms of this journey? And what are your aspirations in regards to the area around alcohol and training people and educating people on the issues of alcohol? I'm intrigued to find out where this journey of yours might lead.
Yeah, I'm actually incredibly intrigued as well. But when I first stopped, I was still working in hospitality, and I remember thinking this no longer aligns with my life or who I am. So I ended up leaving hospitality. And because health became such an important factor in my life, I wanted something that aligned with health. So I decided I love working out. I've always loved it. I'm going to become a personal trainer. So I remember I got my qualifications. I started to get clients, and I was loving it. For the first time, I was no longer working in a bar till 4 a.m., but I was waking up at 4 a.m. to go and train people. And I enjoyed it. I had a lot more downtime. I could look after my diet, my sleep, my rest, my exercise. It was, I really enjoyed it, but it was still just a small fraction of this big world that I'd found through not drinking. But it took me a year or two to really realize that. And it was only earlier last year that I was living out in Thailand. And I remember I put on my Instagram, listen, whoever wants a live workout, we're going to do it tomorrow, 7 a.m. I did it 7 a.m. UK time. And I found this American guy who had his own gym. And I asked him if I could use the back room to do some live workout. I was super excited. I was super nervous. And I remember setting up, and he was really excited for me. And it was like 2 minutes to go. And I'm like warming up, getting ready. And I sat there for a good 25 minutes and no one came. No one came onto the live. No one did a workout. And I remember just being like, this is going to be tough. Like, not everyone is Joe Wicks. And it was just kind of this easy route of going, yeah, I'm just going to do hit sessions online. But yeah, it wasn't working. And I remember the next day, I went for lunch with a couple of friends who she's a women's empowerment coach. He's a men's mental health coach, like really inspirational couple. And me and my girlfriend were there. And I told them that it was actually that day was my 4 years of no drinking. And every year on the day of my sober anniversary or sober birthday, whatever we call it, I used to put a post out on Instagram, basically just talking about it, just hoping that maybe it would inspire someone or help someone. And I was talking to this couple about seeing them talk on camera, and they said, why don't you talk on camera? And it's weird, out of all the things that I used to do that didn't scare me, talking on a phone alone was terrifying. It was really strange because, for me, it's all about connection with people. And it was weird to think that I'm connecting through this screen. However, I did it, I recorded, and I basically said, listen, today I'm clearing my schedule. If any of you out there are struggling with alcohol, reach out to me. We can have a call. Maybe there's some advice I might be able to give. And at this point, I knew that I knew a lot about this because I've been speaking about it for years, but I didn't realize the demand there would be. And, my phone blew up and everyone was reaching out. People I'd known for years who I never even thought had issues were reaching out, being like, I really need some help. And I realized no one needs a PT. There's enough PTs. There's not enough people doing this, dealing with drinking and sobriety and breaking down the stigmas around it. And so yeah, I decided that was it. I'm going to become a sobriety coach, sobriety and wellness, because there's a lot of people out there that stop drinking, but then don't further enhance their lifestyle, their health, their mental health, physical health. For me, I think it goes hand in hand. Removing alcohol and removing drugs is the first step, and removing that hurdle, and then we can focus on how to become the best, healthiest version of yourself. And this is finally a point in my life where I realize this is what I want to do. This is what I know I can do, and I know what people need. I know the world needs it. So I've finally found it, and now it's just about growing it bigger and bigger every day. So where I'm going to be, location wise, is still to be seen. I love to travel, and I can do this online. So I've been thinking recently about US, Mexico, back to Bali. I love Vietnam. Just living the best life I can, you know?
Well, good luck with that. Where can listeners and viewers find you, Will, on social media, Instagram? Are you on
Yeah,
any other?
I keep setting up TikToks, but they keep getting taken down. I don't know why. I think it's because I use the word cocaine too much. But I do most of mine through Instagram, and the handle is at Teetotal Trainer. And then through my Instagram, I have the link which redirects people either to one-to-one coaching or support calls with myself. I've built a community called the Teetotal Trail, which inside I do live sessions with everyone a few times a week where if anyone has any questions, they can come and I'll be there to answer them. I also have the workshop I mentioned inside that community. And I also have a podcast, which is called The Teetotal Trail, How to Break Free from Alcohol, which is a really good start for anyone who's not looking to engage, but just listen. It's a really non-confrontational way of actually learning a bit more about why you're feeling the way you're feeling. So the podcast is always I always say a must to listen to.
What we'll do is we'll put all the links to your social media, your podcast, everything in the description. So if anyone's watching this on YouTube or if anyone's on Spotify or Apple, we can get those links over on that so they
Amazing.
can click and share. Thank you for your time today, Will. It's been much appreciated and learned a lot. And good luck with your journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, man. It's been great to talk about it. So yeah, I'm happy to be on.
Thank you, mate.